So, when you're ready.
Hello, this is my introduction to sports coaching by Shafie. This is the introduction to my presentation. Today I'll be taking you through the first 3 learning outcomes, which will cover things like evaluating behaviour and evaluating young people in sport. To me, defining a coach includes such things as it educates students and doesn't hinder them. A coach shouldn't be the person who takes students back. He should be learning new things and introducing a new way of playing sport. But to me, a coach really, to be an influence in someone's life, needs to teach them about discipline. Now I'm going to take it on to talking about philosophy. Philosophy is a fingerprint, a footprint, a way of doing something that is personal to a coach. You're able to actually take philosophy from other people. So in football, I love the philosophy from Arsene Wenger, which is possession progression, which means to have the ball and move with the ball. And while having this philosophy, I've introduced my own philosophies, which is when I'm working with performers and elite performers, I've decided to use don't look into luck or being unfortunate. You should be responsible for your own luck and your own misfortunes. This way, let's say in basketball, you haven't closed the player down and the player scores from the halfway line. This to me is not unfortunate from your part. It's a great hoop, don't get me wrong, but in reality, someone should have been there. And that's what I use at the performance stage. Results. To me, results aren't actually the most important thing, but at the time, coaches seem to forget this. And this is why in interviews you see such things as, oh, the ref was a disgrace today, or we got really unfortunate, things like that. But where actually it's more important to me to focus on the performance. The performance, so let's say winning is not the same as success, and failure isn't the same as losing. You can have a bad win and a very good loss. It depends what circumstances your team has performed in, really. And then obviously after these games, or during these games, you'll use these 2 types of leadership coaching, which are autocratic and democratic. I've moved onto the results page, because during getting a result and not a performance, it's normal to use the autocratic way of coaching. This is because it gets your point across quick and firmly. Whereas democratic involves discussion and it's not immediate effect. I'd use democratic coaching the majority of the time, and this would be mainly used on the training field and not actually in the performance stage itself. Leadership. Leadership is one of the most important qualities about a coach, as it actually involves taking a lot of responsibility to the group. So if you don't take responsibility as a leader, you will actually not, you will not have a structure to your team. Responsibility is actually where you take a loss and you actually take it on board and you learn from it. Whereas, let's say, in a dugout, Dean Saunders, the other week, saw that there was mud in it. And then he said, somebody in the staff department should be taking a look at this, because if a player sees mud on the surface, or let's say kit's not hung up in the dressing room, this could affect their performance out on the pitch. And if someone's not doing their job, players will soon follow suit. Communication. As you see here, these are examples of in-game communication. And then in-game communication, in my opinion, is the hardest form of communication to get right. Because in many situations that you see in these athletes here, they're almost struggling to understand the concept that maybe the tactics or the approach to the game that they had before it is about to change. And as you see in communication, I think this is especially in England, is that a lot of communication is used through body language and actually not what comes out your mouth. So in England, people like to read people's body language. This is abroad as well. This isn't just England really, but I'm using this example because I've only coached in England at this point in my career. And it says up to 65 and 93% of all communication is non-verbal, which basically means that it's what you do with your hand, it's how you raise your voice and your tone of your voice. And then to move on to this side of communication, these are all three formats of communication that you need to become a great coach. These three dimensions of communication include intrapersonal communication, which is where you communicate, where you're able to format things in your own brain, understand what you mean yourself. So if you are able to do this, or if you are even unable to do this in fact, you will struggle with interpersonal communication, which is communicating with others. If you can't do the intrapersonal communication, you will not be able to do interpersonal communication at all, really. These are all fundamental to becoming a great coach. Transpersonal communication is where you're able to speak to a big group of people. And the difference between inter and transpersonal communication is that in interpersonal communication you're speaking to one. So there's a lot more eye contact involved and a lot more personalisation in this sort of communication. Moving on to non-violent communication, this is unacceptable now in the 21st century. Everyone knows it in coaching. If you threaten a child or you threaten an adult, in fact, there'll be big precautions to your job and your career. So quite frankly, it's not acceptable. And if you see in these two pictures here, once you start using non-violent communication, such as Sir Alex Ferguson towards referees, participants and performers will follow in suit, which is dreadful for your reputation. Motivating. Motivating to me is one of the most important things in sport, because as you see here, if motivation levels are not right, you'll have a terrible performance either way, on the pitch, off the pitch. As you see here, these different types of motivating, such as emotional arousal and such things like that, when these aren't correct, performances will change. And these performances, if you're not aroused, you won't perform. And if you're too aroused, you'll do something, let's say, which is wrong in behavioural senses, such as Luis Suarez biting someone. Where I'm looking at in coaching is that there's not enough in the modern coaching a psychological approach. So this situation has now happened 3 times. 3 times is not a coincidence. It needs approached in the right manner, and to be quite frank, in football I think there needs to be a lot more psychological coaching. Later on in this presentation I might move on to psychology a little bit more. But as you see here, Chelsea, who went 2-0 up against Bradford in the FA Cup, maybe they needed a word in their ear because they weren't performing at a high enough level, and Bradford, a League One side, ended up coming back against Chelsea. That's nothing down to actually playing ability for Chelsea, because these players were worth millions and millions of pounds, and quite simply they did not perform. The theories of needs here. Most performers fall under 3 categories. These are achievement, affiliation and power. Personally, I feel one of my tutors, Ash Gill, falls under power. The reason this is because when we are coaching, we like to be the ones making decisions. Personally, I like to be the one making decisions, just because if I'm the one making decisions, I'm the one who's succeeding and failing, which means I'm almost fast-tracked when learning. I know if I've achieved well, or all my practices have actually fallen through, which means I can improve my own performance. But actually performers themselves will take up the role in teams. Such as affiliation here, they just want to be winning, such as Luis Suarez. They don't really mind their role in the team as long as they have a really big winning desire. Winning is what matters to them. And achievement, again, is quite similar. Behaviour. As you see here in the top right corner, I've almost used again the format of role models. If you have 2 managers on the touchline, let's say, or 2 coaches, first team coaches on the touchline, engaging in confrontation, it will mostly come out in your participants as well. For example, in this game here, in the top right corner, Arsenal happened to have a man sent off. This is because adrenaline got too high and things got out of hand. which is totally unacceptable in a professional sport. And then here I'll move on to behaviour. This is more with youngsters. This is where you have to be aware. When disciplining a youngster, you might have to put a positive either side of the negative. This way they won't take it too far to heart. And the most important thing when disciplining someone, I'll say below 13, is that when you do discipline them, make sure they don't hold a grudge, because otherwise it's hard to actually get the confidence back and help them engage in your sessions anymore. And then there's obviously your positive reinforcement by giving a reward. I'll normally use this format myself when coaching children in a boot camp scenario, where a kid's not showing an awful lot of confidence, but he's approaching the sessions in the right manner. Problems with giving out rewards is that the kids who use negative behaviour might actually think you're taking favourites, which is a horrible position to be in as a coach, because this way, again, this person who, let's say, has been misbehaving might not take a fancy to you as a coach or as a person. And then here you see, this is where you have to be careful with discipline, because sport, to me, is a mix between art and science. So if you discipline your children too much and then you don't let them express themselves, you might actually not be able to perform to the maximum ability they have. That almost falls under the philosophy as well. Young people. When you're coaching a group of young children, it's very difficult to find basically children that are almost mixed into groups. This is because when you're teaching a group of children of different ages, they will struggle to integrate. They're not all going to be the same, they're not going to all be the same gender, culture, maybe they might even have disabilities, some of them, if you're put in that sort of situation. But when this situation happens, it's your job to basically make sure that no kids are in groups that hinder each other. So if you have to put the kids in groups due to a different ability level, I'm afraid it's your job to have to do that. Again, when teaching children, this is the most key thing for me. Repetition, repetition. So when you use repetition, you don't just, how do I say, achieve the same technique once. It weren't a fluke. Let's say if I'm even playing in silly sports such as darts, if I use an underarm throw, get triple 20, that doesn't mean it's a good technique. That will not work 10 times out of 10. This way you need to actually correct the child's technique and teach them correctly. The problem with repetition is that if you repeat things too many times, some children will struggle to keep engaged. Some children will be able to repeat an exercise 10 times and keep engaged, whereas another one might be able to only repeat it twice. So it's your job to keep them kids fresh on their toes and keep them occupied, whereas teaching the kids different methods. Gender and cultural issues. This is most important when keeping people equal but treating people different. So as you see in this picture here, you might not even be able to wear the same clothing in a certain sport. That doesn't mean the person should be given a different opportunity. We had an issue last year in our course with a girl called Steph, and she played football, obviously for the girls team, but she felt that she got quite advanced for that team, and she wanted to play with the boys, which is all well and good, but some of the boys, let's say, didn't take to it straight away. It's quite a cultural thing to do, to be a girl and play football with the rest of the boys. And in my opinion, this is totally wrong. It's not a competitive game. There's no regulation to say a girl can't play. If a girl wants to play, they can play. And to me, if you find a participant who's not open to culture, then you better introduce them to, it's actually the 21st century now, and that girls and different genders are allowed to play in sport and different cultures. When working with disabilities, you have to remember that they're not exactly going to get the same experience that an able person would have. This is because they might not be capable of doing different things. Let's say you're playing a game of cricket and you're doing runs. It's your job as a coach to introduce a system that will engage them in the activity. So So for example, while fielding you can make this person, let's say disabled below the hips, a wicket keeper. And then also when batting, if you ask another participant to actually help them out and be their runner. That's about it.
Brilliant. Just going to ask you a question.
Good.
Let's see what I wrote down. What social aspects or skills do children get from participating in sport? And if you could evaluate me, so good and bad stuff they get from social.
Social, well, I'll say one of the bad things about the social aspects of sport is that sport normally, I try and not influence this in my session, they normally tend to go into groups they're comfortable in, and in the surroundings they're comfortable with, the friends they're with every other day. So, make a really good session in my opinion, you'd have to mix, like I said, genders and cultures and meet different people. Other social things is that in sport there's actually also, it almost is acceptable to use quite a lot of bad language.
Yeah.
So it's important actually to, when a kid does use bad language, to actually go to their behavioural issues and use discipline such as, not say punishment, because in their background you've got to remember that it might actually be acceptable in that child's house to use that sort of language. So you need to give them a warning. Well, let's say if they use that language again, you'll need to approach the situation with maybe a kid who is using our architectural language and approach them with a reward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.